Because the thing is that I felt that I had gone as far as I could with the mask. It had actually become a limitation at that point.
When Kane snapped, WWE had no backup plan. That is the truth. Nobody in Stamford wants to put on a highlight reel. The company spends millions building characters, choreographing moments, and selling the idea that everything is under control. But 5 times the machine broke, and every single time, the man standing closest to the wreckage was Glenn Jacobs, the guy they called Kane, the most reliable performer in the history of that locker room. If you are feeling this story already, hit the hype feature and give this video some hype right now. Now let's get into it properly. Here is what makes this worth your full attention. Kane is not the guy you expect to find at the center of chaos. He is the one who shows up on time, does the work, hits every mark, and goes home without incident. 3 decades in the business. 0 reputation for backstage drama. A man so dependable that management trusted him with anything and everything they needed handled quietly. So when the Kane persona cracked, it was not because he lost his temper or went rogue on purpose. It was because the world around him stopped making sense. And the company that sold control to its audience every single week delivered absolutely none of it in the moments that mattered most. 5 moments. 5 separate times that WWE's carefully constructed version of reality ran face first into actual reality. And Kane was present for every one of them. Not as the cause, not as the villain, as the guy left standing in the middle of someone else's mess, trying to make it make sense. Let's start with the loudest one, the most public one, and the one that happened on the biggest stage WWE had access to in the year 2018, in front of a packed live audience in Saudi Arabia, broadcast to millions of viewers around the world. This is the one that hit differently. This is the one that felt like a curtain being pulled back by accident. Crown Jewel 2018, Riyadh. The main event was built entirely on nostalgia. Brothers of Destruction, meaning The Undertaker and Kane, standing across from D-Generation X, meaning Triple H and Shawn Michaels. 4 legends. 4 men who had collectively defined an entire era of professional wrestling. The concept was simple and the commercial logic was straightforward. Bring them back together one more time. Let the live crowd feel something they remembered from the old days. Deliver a spectacle that justified the price tag. Package it neatly. Collect the revenue. Go home and talk about how well it worked. WWE sold this match with everything they had. They treated it like a genuine dream collision. 2 of the most iconic factions in company history finally sharing the ring at the same time. The promotional materials were sharp. The video packages were polished. The production value around the whole event was enormous. From the outside, it looked like exactly the kind of controlled, well-managed nostalgia product the company had built its second act on, a memory being sold back to the people who made it. What the audience actually received was something else entirely. The performers themselves, the 4 men who were inside that ring, used specific words when they talked about it afterward. They called it a train wreck. They called it a complete disaster. Not internet critics with grudges, not fans looking to score points, the actual participants. The people who had planned this match, traveled to Saudi Arabia to perform it, and then had to look each other in the eye in the locker room when it was over. Those were their words. The match fell apart almost immediately after the bell rang. Triple H suffered a legitimate and severe injury very early in the encounter. He tore his pectoral muscle while performing what should have been a routine maneuver. Not a minor thing. Not a tweak that you work through with some tape and gritted teeth. A real tear. The kind of injury that requires surgery and months of recovery. Something physically catastrophic happened to one of the 4 people in that match in the opening minutes. And now everything that had been planned was gone. The other 3 men, all of them well past the age where this kind of improvised physical performance comes naturally, had to adjust everything in real time. No script to fall back on, no choreography to follow. Just 3 veterans trying to hold together a major match that had already lost one of its primary participants to a genuine medical situation. The result was exactly what you would expect. Missed spots, dangerous sequences that did not land the way they needed to. Moments that looked wrong to anyone watching carefully. The match was unraveling in front of the crowd, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Shawn Michaels had not competed in a regular match in 8 years before this night. 8 years away from in-ring competition. His body was not conditioned for this. He took a gash above his eyebrow during the match. And he was physically exhausted in a way that became visible to the audience. He simply could not sustain the physical output the moment was demanding of him. The Undertaker, a man who had spent his entire career mastering the art of controlling every detail of every match, admitted afterward that he felt a mental disconnect he could not overcome. He said he lost his pride in that ring, that it was awful, that all four of them had gone into Saudi Arabia believing they could do this in their sleep, and the combination of their ages, the lack of regular practice, and the physical toll of years in the business made that belief completely wrong. And then, in the middle of all of this chaos, the thing happened that nobody had written down anywhere. During a physical exchange involving Triple H and Kane, Triple H accidentally hooked the edge of Jacob's mask. As Triple H pulled away from the hold, the mask came completely off Jacob's head. Not a scripted reveal, not a carefully constructed dramatic moment that had been built toward over weeks of television. An accident, a live, unplanned, uncontrolled accident that happened in front of thousands of people in Riyadh and millions watching at home. Now here's the reason that moment hit so completely differently from any unmasking that had ever happened in WWE history before it. Glenn Jacobs was not living the lifestyle of a supernatural demon character in 2018. He had been elected mayor of Knox County, Tennessee. He had taken that office on September 1st of that same year, just weeks before this event. He was a public official, a county executive. He spent his working week managing the business of local government, attending public meetings, giving press statements, living the life of a civic leader. And the life of a county mayor does not leave much room for maintaining the wild dark hair and soot-covered facial aesthetic of a burned monster from the depths of some hellish storyline. When the mask flew across the ring, the audience did not see what they had been primed to imagine underneath it. They did not see something haunting or supernatural or disturbing. They saw a balding, clean-cut man with the kind of professional appearance that belongs in a government building. Fans at home and in the arena started naming it immediately. Corporate Kane, middle management Kane. The demon born in the fires of a furnace had been replaced in one unplanned second, arched by someone who looked like he had a constituent meeting scheduled for Monday morning. The illusion did not just crack, it ceased to exist. WWE had positioned this entire match as a showcase of living legends, as proof that the Attitude Era still had power and resonance and draw. What the paying audience received instead was a live, unedited demonstration of what actually happens when a company tries to bring back something that the passage of time has already finished. The performers apologized to each other backstage. There was silence where there should have been celebration. No press release fixed what had just occurred on live television in front of the world. The machine that spent every hour of every week telling its audience that every detail was managed had just lost control of one of its most carefully protected images. Ano in the largest and most expensive setting it had ever operated in. That moment is where we begin this story, but it is not where the story starts. Because this was not the first time the Kane image had fractured under pressure. To understand the full picture, you have to go back 15 years to a backstage segment on Raw that most people remember as a scripted emotional breakdown. But that was built on top of something real, something personal, something that Glenn Jacobs himself was genuinely afraid of. June 23, 2003, Glenn Jacobs had been performing as Kane, wearing the mask, building the character for 6 full years. 6 years of constructing one of the most recognizable and durable personas in WWE history. The mask was not simply a piece of costume, it was the foundation of the entire character's logic. It created an invisible wall between the supernatural monster the audience feared and the human being behind the performance. It allowed Jacobs to communicate terror and menace without the normal tools of facial expression. It gave the character an aura that no amount of dialogue or ring work alone could manufacture. For 6 years, that mask was the single most important piece of equipment in Glenn Jacobs' professional life, and the company decided it was time to take it away. The storyline required Kane to lose his mask following a defeat to Triple H in a match where the title was on the line. The decision had been made. The direction had been approved. The unmasking was going to happen, and there was no version of this story where it did not happen. But in the week leading up to that moment, Kane appeared in a backstage segment on Raw where he caught a glimpse of his own reflection in a mirror and destroyed it. He smashed the mirror after seeing his own grotesque face staring back at him. The action of breaking the mirror was written into the script, but the emotional truth underneath the performance was not entirely manufactured. Jacobs was genuinely conflicted about losing the mask, not in a casual way, in a deep, professional, career-stakes way. The fear he felt was real. He was afraid that taking the mask off would destroy the mystique that had made him a main event performer. For 6 years, the mystery of what was underneath had been part of the draw. The audience's imagination had been doing work that no makeup job or hairstyle could ever replicate. What was under the mask? Something burned and disfigured and terrifying. Something inhuman. Take the mask away and suddenly the audience has their answer and the mystery is gone, and Kane is just a very large man in red boots standing in the ring without anything to hide behind. That was Jacobs' genuine fear, and that fear was the engine running underneath the mirror segment. The script said break the mirror. The anxiety anxiety behind the performance came from somewhere the writers had not typed on a page. That segment also gave professional wrestling one of its most persistent and entertaining pieces of folklore. People started calling it the 7-year curse. Kane smashed the mirror on June 23, 2003. What came after that night was a long stretch of inconsistent creative direction, storylines that started and stopped without resolution, mock character work that drifted without a clear destination. Jacobs kept showing up and kept working because that is what he does. But the momentum that had built during the masked era did not transfer cleanly into what followed. The character went sideways for a while, and then 7 years after that mirror broke, in 2010, Kane won the World Heavyweight Championship. The timeline lined up so perfectly that the story attached itself to the event and never let go. Whether you believe in curses is your own business, the numbers are the numbers. But the part of this story that reveals the most about what the job actually costs happened away from any camera, in a hallway, during a haircut. To get the visual right for the unmasking reveal, WWE's creative team decided that Kane's exposed head needed to tell a story, and the decision was made to give him a partially shaved, soot-covered scalp. The idea was to suggest years of psychological damage and physical trauma. Give the audience something genuinely unsettling to look at when the mask came off for the first time. Something that extended the character's horror logic even without the mask in place. Bruce Pritchard was overseeing the whole process. The stylist had gotten partway through the haircut when Pritchard stopped everything and walked out to go show the current state of things to Vince McMahon. Progress report mid-process. Standard WWE creative involvement. So Glenn Jacobs was sitting in that chair in the middle of a career-defining moment with half his head shaved in the most alarming way possible, waiting for a business decision to come back down the hallway. So surrounded by producers and creative people and the weight of everything that was about to change professionally. And then he remembered something. In the middle of all of it, in the heat of the moment, surrounded by all of that significance, it hit him that he had somewhere to be. He had to pick up his children from school. Picture that, a 7-foot man, half of his scalp shaved, soot on the parts that had been done, the other half still untouched, standing in a school parking lot, surrounded by station wagons and parents holding sippy cups, waiting for the afternoon bell. That is the real life of a professional wrestler that never makes it into the highlight packages. The company demands total immersion in the character and total commitment to the creative vision and total availability for whatever comes next on the schedule. And then you have to be a parent simultaneously without any buffer between those two realities. You are a supernatural monster with a half-finished haircut, and then you are a father standing in a pickup line 40 minutes later. No transition, no moment to become someone else. Just both things at once because the schedule does not care about the gap between them. The unmasking ended up working creatively. The character that came after the mask was removed gave Jacobs tools he had never had access to before. He could speak. He could cut promos with real psychological complexity and genuine menace. The character evolved into something darker and stranger and more interesting than what the mask had allowed. But the real anxiety that powered that mirror segment, the human fear underneath the scripted breakdown, Darkary, was something WWE treated as a minor footnote to a creative decision. The company saw a character pivot. Jacobs lived through a career crisis. The distance between those two perspectives tells you everything about the relationship between the company and the people who make it work. And that distance shows up again, even more clearly, in a situation that moved from the locker room to a film set. Before we get to the movie, though, there is a chapter in this story that most casual fans have never heard in full. It involves an airplane, a pair of seats, and a judicial proceeding with no courtroom, no gavel, no legal authority, and no documentation of any kind. It also involved Michael Hayes carrying luggage through airports for a week, which is its own separate source of satisfaction. WWE has always presented itself to the outside world as a structured corporate entertainment company. Human resources, legal departments, contracts with specific terms, a whole professional apparatus built to suggest that the organization functions the way a legitimate major business functions. That presentation is accurate up to a certain point, but behind it, for most of the years when the company was at its peak commercial power, the actual social order of the locker room was maintained by something that appears in no organizational chart and has no official standing whatsoever. It was called Wrestler's Court. Wrestler's Court was not a nickname or a loose metaphor for informal conversations. It was a real proceeding that took place at television tapings, conducted in full seriousness by the senior members of the roster, was designed to handle disputes that were too significant to ignore, but too personal or too embarrassing to bring to management. And the reason it existed is important. In the culture of a professional wrestling locker room during that era, going to Vince McMahon with a personal grievance about another performer was the worst social move you could make. It branded you immediately. It made you a stooge. stooge. And being a stooge in that environment was a reputation that stuck to you and did not come off easily. So the court existed as the alternative, the option that lets you pursue a resolution without destroying your standing in the process. The Undertaker ran the court as judge. This made complete sense to everyone in the building because the Undertaker's authority in that locker room was not assigned by management, and it was earned through decades of work and a level of respect that nobody else on the roster could match. JBL served as prosecutor. This also made complete sense because JBL has never passed up an opportunity to turn a grievance into a performance. The proceedings were real and they were taken seriously by everyone present. The case that involved Kane started on an airplane during the period when the Hardy Boys were rising quickly up the card. Matt and Jeff Hardy were tag team champions. They were young, popular, getting significant television time and real creative investment from the company. On a flight during a road trip, they boarded the aircraft and took seats in the first-class cabin. Michael Hayes, who was managing them at the time, had told them it was fine. He told them that as tag champions, where they had earned the right to travel in that section, he told them the seats were appropriate for their status. The Hardys believed him because they had no reason not to. He was their manager. He was an experienced veteran of the business. If he said it was fine, it was fine. The problem was a rule that did not exist in any official document, but was understood by every senior member of the roster. First-class travel on flights belonged to veterans. Seniority determined comfort on the road. That was the code. It was unwritten, but it was real. And Glenn Jacobs had the standing that came with it. When Jacobs boarded the plane and found both seats in the section that should have been available to him occupied by two young tag team champions, he was left to find a seating coach. He sat down. He did not say anything on the plane, and he did not make a scene. He flew to the destination and let the process that existed for exactly this situation do what it was designed to do. The trial happened at the following week's Raw taping. JBL built the prosecution with the kind of committed intensity that Matt Hardy later described as completely unbelievable to witness. He presented the offense as though something fundamental had been violated. He made a situation involving airline seating sound like a serious breach of professional order. The Undertaker listened to all of it and ran the proceeding with the authority that only someone with his reputation could bring to something this informal. But the court applied real judgment to the situation. It recognized that the Hardy Boys had been acting on direct instructions from Michael Hayes, and they had not decided on their own that they deserved those seats. They had been told by someone with more experience that their status entitled them to take them. The court separated the people who made the decision from the people who followed the decision. The Hardys received a warning and were ordered to buy Kane dinner as acknowledgement that a line had been crossed. Manageable, educational, done. Michael Hayes received something different. Hayes was sentenced to carry Kane's bags for 1 week. Every airport, every hotel lobby, every arena arrival and departure. Michael Hayes, a man who had been in the professional wrestling business long enough to know exactly what the rules were, walking behind Glenn Jacobs with his luggage for 7 consecutive days. That was the punishment, publicly delivered, witnessed by the entire roster, who exactly calibrated to the nature of the offense. The point of what Jacobs did in that situation is easy to miss if you only look at the result. He had other options. He could have confronted the Hardys directly and turned it into a physical situation. He could have gone to McMahon and escalated it through official channels, which would have made him a stooge and damaged his locker room standing permanently. He could have decided the whole thing was not worth his energy and let it go. He chose none of those paths. He used the system that existed. He trusted the institutional mechanism that the locker room had built for exactly this kind of moment, and he let it work. He got his result, and he did not create a larger problem in the process. That choice is the thing worth understanding. Because Wrestlers Court existed precisely because the alternative was real physical confrontations between large, physically capable, professionally competitive performers who had spent their careers training to hurt people inside a ring. The Shadow Court was strange and informal and would have looked completely absurd to anyone from outside the business observing it. But it worked. It redirected conflict into structure. It gave people with genuine grievances a path to resolution that did not require anyone to get hurt or anyone's career to be damaged by association. And the fact that WWE permitted this system to operate, that the company essentially outsourced its locker room dispute resolution to the Undertaker and a mock prosecution team, who tells you something honest about what the company actually trusted to maintain order behind its corporate presentation. It was not the employee handbook. It was a shadow court run by the most respected man on the roster, and the company let it exist because the alternative was worse. So order was maintained through an unofficial institution that the company never formally acknowledged but absolutely relied upon, and Kane was its most composed user. The most outwardly terrifying person in the building handled a real professional slight through proper channels and walked away with dinner and a man carrying his bags. That kind of restraint is not an accident. That is a personality, which is what makes what happened on a movie movie set 2 years later so telling? Because in that situation, it was not a younger performer getting above himself or a manager making a bad call. It was the person at the top of the entire company deciding to make a creative choice that would have destroyed the project, and Jacobs being the person who had to stand in the room and say no. WWE Studios launched its feature film ambitions with a horror slasher called See No Evil. Glenn Jacobs was cast as the lead villain, a character named Jacob Goodnight, a massive, violent, psychologically deranged killer who hunted victims through an abandoned hotel. The concept was designed for the genre: build a monster, establish the threat, deliver the kills with enough craft and enough tension to hold an audience through 90 minutes of horror. The creative framework was solid. An R-rated slasher film starring one of the most physically imposing men in professional entertainment made commercial sense on paper. Then Vince McMahon offered a creative contribution to the production. According to former WWE writer Dan Madigan, who was closely involved in developing the film, McMahon proposed that the character of Jacob Goodnight should possess and at some point display a 3-foot-long organ, with the reveal landing with an audible thud on the floor. The reasoning McMahon offered was rooted in his long-standing belief that controversy creates attention and attention creates revenue. He wanted the film to generate a reaction. He wanted people talking about it. He wanted a moment that would travel. What McMahon appeared not to have fully considered was the immediate consequence of including that scene in a theatrically released film. A scene of that nature does not receive an R rating from the Motion Picture Association. It receives an NC-17, which is the rating that effectively removes a film from mainstream commercial distribution. An NC-17 film cannot be shown in the majority of American cinemas. It cannot be advertised on broadcast television. It cannot be placed in the standard distribution channels that determine whether a movie makes its money back. The entire financial architecture of the project, everything that justified the production budget and the marketing investment and the whole business case for a WWE Studios film, here collapses the moment that scene appears in the final cut and the rating process assigns it a number that takes it out of general release. Jacobs refused to participate in the scene. He pushed back directly. Dan Madigan had to stand in front of the owner of a billion-dollar company and walk him through the basic economics of why a 3-foot prosthetic would destroy the film's ability to reach a mainstream audience. He had to explain to a man who had built an entertainment empire that shock value in this specific context was not a marketing strategy. It was a commercial death sentence. McMahon relented. The scene did not make it into the film. See No Evil moved forward with an R rating and a distribution plan that allowed it to reach the audience it was made for. Jacobs kept his professional dignity intact. The movie avoided a category that would have turned it from a commercially viable horror release into something that could only be shown in a handful of specialty venues, but absorb what that situation actually required. A man who spent his professional life performing as a monster had to be the most rational person in a creative meeting about his own film. He had to argue commercial logic against his employer's creative instincts in an environment where disagreeing with the employer is almost never the safe or comfortable choice. He was right. The scene was wrong for the film, wrong for the rating, wrong for the business. And Jacobs made the case clearly enough that the decision was reversed. WWE positioned itself publicly as a serious entertainment company with genuine Hollywood ambitions. The practical reality of that aspiration was Glenn Jacobs and Dan Madigan standing in a room explaining box office math to a billionaire who wanted a thud on the floor. The company that packaged everything with corporate polish and marketing precision needed its resident monster to save its own film from its owner's creative impulses. Now we travel to Puerto Rico. The year is 2009. The house show tour has stopped in Arecibo. And this particular chapter of the story is not about a mask or a movie or a seat assignment on a commercial flight. This one is about two of the largest human beings employed anywhere in professional entertainment deciding to have a completely real, completely unscripted physical confrontation in a dressing room. And the entire rest of the locker room standing very still and hoping someone else would make the first move. Big Show and Great Khali had been building towards something for months before that night in Puerto Rico. The tension between them was what people inside the business call giant heat. When two performers of comparable physical presence are competing for the same position, the same role, the same meaningful spots in the show, the friction that develops has a different quality from ordinary locker room competition. It is more personal because it is more existential. The argument underneath it all is about who deserves to occupy that space. Who is the real version of that thing? And that argument does not resolve itself on its own. Big Show was the better in-ring performer. Great Khali was taller. Each of them was aware of exactly what the other one had that they did not. They had been looking at each other across that gap for long enough that it had stopped being neutral. The specific event that broke everything open was a corner chop. During a tag team match, Khali performed a corner chop on his opponent. The corner chop was Big Show's signature move, not just a move he used among others. The move that defined a specific audience interaction moment in his matches. The one that the crowd knew, and the one that belonged to him in the way that moves can belong to people in this business when they have performed them enough times in front of enough people for long enough. And Khali used it in front of the live crowd, without apparent concern for whose it was. Big Show was standing on the apron watching this happen. He said something audible. Khali replied. The reply was, "You're the shits too, bro," which is one of the most unintentionally perfect things ever said in the middle of a genuine confrontation in the history of professional sports entertainment, and the fact that it has become part of the permanent oral history of the business is entirely appropriate and correct. The verbal exchange became physical. Two men with a combined weight approaching 900 pounds threw real punches in a dressing room in Arecibo, here in Puerto Rico. Chris Jericho was present, The Undertaker was present, CM Punk was in the room. By every account from every person who was there, the atmosphere in that dressing room went very still and very tense, because nobody wanted to step between those two bodies while those two bodies were actively trying to damage each other. Jericho described it later as a Godzilla versus King Kong situation and made clear he was not reaching for a colorful metaphor. These were two of the 3 or 4 largest athletes in the entire company. They were throwing real punches in a room with limited space and no referee and no script. And the roster was standing around the edges of the situation, aware that physical intervention carried its own significant risk. The locker room needed someone with both the physical credibility to be taken seriously by both men and the personal authority to make the intervention mean something. They looked at Glenn Jacobs. Glenn Jacobs had just finished showering. He was wearing a towel. According to the account given by Chris Jericho, Jacobs was not hesitant because of the physical danger involved in stepping between two men that size. He was hesitant because he was genuinely concerned that the towel would come loose in the process of breaking up the fight. He was standing at the edge of the situation, doing a real-time calculation about whether his grip on the fabric was reliable enough to survive a physical intervention between Big Show and Great Khali without the entire WWE locker room seeing things they could not unsee. Right, that is one of the most human moments in the history of this business. The man the locker room needed to stop a real fight between two giants was standing there in a towel, running physics calculations about fabric security, while real violence was happening 10 feet in front of him. The fight ended without a clean, decisive intervention. Big Show tripped over a chair. The stumble created enough of a disruption that Great Khali came down on top of him, and the chaos of that created the opening that the rest of the roster needed. Vince McMahon issued a ruling after the fact. Big Show was ordered to formally apologize for throwing the first punch. The company applied its corporate decision-making process to what had been a real backstage brawl. A verdict was delivered. An apology was required. The machinery of official resolution was applied to a situation that the machinery of official management had done nothing to prevent. Jacobs did not step in as the primary physical force in the moment, but what he did afterward mattered in a way that does not show up in any official record. He and The Undertaker ribbed Big Show about what happened for a long time after Puerto Rico. Not cruelly, in the specific way that locker room humor works in that environment, where you turn the most tense and dangerous moment into a story that everyone can share and that both men involved can eventually participate in. That process, the transformation of a violent incident into a piece of shared history that everyone can laugh about, is how a locker room reintegrates two people after something like that. You give the incident a form that makes it part of the culture instead of leaving it as an open wound. Jacobs understood that. He helped make it happen. But step back from the specific humor of the towel detail and look at what that night in Arecibo actually represented in the larger context of this story. WWE sells controlled violence as its core product. Every punch is planned. Every slam is executed with specific technique designed to protect both people involved. The whole enterprise is built on the premise that even its most dangerous-looking content is managed and safe and constructed. That is the brand promise. That is what distinguishes what they do from actual fighting. And then two performers who were not getting along had a real fight in a real dressing room while the rest of the roster stood frozen and the designated peacekeeper negotiated with his towel. That was not controlled violence. That was violence in a room that nobody wanted to enter, that ended because someone tripped over a chair. The machine absorbed it. It always absorbs things. That is the one capability WWE genuinely has in abundance. The ability to take chaotic, unscripted reality and process it through its own narrative mechanisms until it becomes manageable. Big Show apologized. The tour continued. The product kept airing every Monday Monday night. Nobody watching at home had any idea any of it had happened. But it happened, and the systems that were supposed to prevent it did not. Management did not sense the tension building over months and address it. Road agents did not intervene before it reached a breaking point. The corporate structure that exists on paper did nothing. A chair and a trip and a group of people reluctantly piling on top of each other stopped it. That was the actual mechanism. Now step back and hold all 5 of these moments in your mind at once. Riyadh in 2018, the hallway in 2003, the airplane in the courtroom, the movie set in 2006, the dressing room in Puerto Rico in 2009. 5 moments scattered across different phases of the same long career, different contexts, different scales, different types of chaos. Adi, but the same truth running through all of them. Glenn Jacobs proved across 5 decades and 5 unscripted moments that the most real thing in WWE was never the monsters or the championships or the pyrotechnics or the carefully managed press releases. It was the professionalism of the man behind the mask, quiet, consistent, reliable in exactly the moments when nothing else was. That is the real story of when Kane snapped. He did not snap. Everything around him did. And he was standing there, sometimes in a towel, every single time it happened. If this video gave you something today, hit like and make sure you are subscribed so you catch what comes next. Drop a comment and tell us which of these 5 moments landed hardest for you. We want to know. See you in the next one.